Right now, as you watch this, there are pieces of plastic inside your brain. Not metaphorically, not theoretically, physically. Microscopic fragments of the same material that makes water bottles, food packaging, and synthetic clothing lodged inside the tissue of your brain. You didn't choose this. You didn't notice it happening. There was no moment where you felt something cross into your skull. It happened silently, invisibly, over years, and it is still happening right now. And here is the part that should stop you cold. We cannot get it out. In May 2024, a team of researchers at the University of New Mexico published a study in Nature Medicine that changed the conversation about microplastics entirely. They analyzed human tissue samples, brain, liver, and kidney, collected from autopsies between 2016 and 2024. What they found in the brain samples was not what they expected. The concentration of microplastics in brain tissue was 7 to 30 times higher than in the liver or kidney. The brain, the most protected organ in the human body, sealed behind a barrier that blocks most foreign substances, had accumulated more plastic than any other organ they tested. But that wasn't the finding that made scientists stop. When they compared brain samples from people who had died with dementia to those without, the difference was staggering. Dementia patients had approximately 10 times more microplastic concentration in their brain tissue. 10 times. That number does not prove causation. The researchers were careful to say that. But it raises a question that nobody in the field can answer yet, and nobody can afford to ignore. What is plastic doing inside the human brain? To understand how plastic gets into your brain, you first need to understand what microplastics actually are. When plastic breaks down from sunlight, heat, or mechanical friction, it does not disappear. It fragments into smaller and smaller pieces. Microplastics are fragments smaller than 5 millimeters. Nanoplastics are smaller still, invisible to the naked eye, small enough to pass through biological membranes that would stop almost anything else. They are everywhere. In the air you breathe, in the water you drink, in the food you eat, particularly seafood, salt, and anything stored in plastic packaging. In 2022, researchers found microplastics in human blood for the first time. In 2023, they found them in human heart tissue, in placental tissue, in the testicles of both humans and dogs, and in 2024, in the brain. The mechanism that makes this particularly disturbing is the blood-brain barrier. This barrier is one of the most sophisticated biological filters in the human body. It is a dense network of cells lining the brain's blood vessels, designed specifically to keep harmful substances out while letting nutrients in. It stops bacteria. It stops most viruses. It stops the majority of drugs, which is why treating brain diseases is so difficult. It does not stop nanoplastics, particles small enough. And in fact, nanoplastics can be smaller than a virus, cross the blood-brain barrier through a process called transcytosis. The cells of the barrier essentially absorb the particles on one side and release them on the other. The brain's own protective system becomes the delivery mechanism. Once inside, the particles accumulate because the brain has no equivalent of a lymphatic system to flush out debris the way other organs do. What enters the brain tends to stay there. And plastic does not arrive alone. Every microplastic particle is a carrier. Plastics absorb chemical pollutants from the environment, pesticides, industrial chemicals, and heavy metals. They also leach their own additives, plasticizers like BPA and phthalates, flame retardants, and stabilizers. These are chemicals that were mixed into the plastic during manufacturing and slowly release over time. When a plastic particle lodges in brain tissue, it brings its chemical cargo with it. Here is where it compounds. The 2024 Nature Medicine study did not just find microplastics in the brain. It found that the concentration has been increasing over time. Brain samples from 2016 had less plastic than samples from 2024. 8 years. Measurably more plastic. The accumulation is not static, it is accelerating. Global plastic production in 1950 was approximately 2 million metric tons per year. In 2023, it exceeded 400 million metric tons. The plastic that entered the environment in 1950 has had 75 years to fragment into smaller and smaller particles. The plastic produced last year is just beginning to break down. The particles getting into human tissue today are the remnants of plastic manufactured decades ago. The plastic being manufactured right now will be producing nanoplastics for the next 50 years. This is not a problem that peaks and resolves. The baseline is rising. It will continue to rise for generations, regardless of what we do today. But the dementia connection is what the field cannot stop looking at. Inflammation is the key mechanism. When the immune cells in the brain, called microglia, encounter a foreign particle, they attempt to destroy it. But plastic cannot be digested. The microglia keep attacking, keep failing, and in the process, release inflammatory signals continuously. Chronic neuroinflammation, the same pathway implicated in Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and a range of other neurodegenerative conditions. The plastic does not have to be toxic on its own. It just has to be there. Persistent and unremovable, it triggers an immune response that never resolves because the trigger never goes away. Matthew Campen, the lead researcher on the 2024 study, put it in terms that are difficult to dismiss. He noted that the amounts of plastic found in the brain were not trace amounts. They were substantial, visible under certain imaging methods, present in quantities that, in any other context, would be considered contamination. They are in your brain right now, and the amount is higher than it was 5 years ago. There is no single victim to name here. That's part of what makes this different from almost every other health crisis in modern medicine. With rabies, there is a bite. With CRISPR, there is a scientist who made a choice. With most diseases, there is a moment, an exposure, an infection, a decision that begins the story. With microplastics, the story began before you were born. Researchers have found microplastics in placental tissue, in amniotic fluid, in meconium, the first stool of a newborn. Children are entering the world already carrying particles that didn't exist in the environment a century ago. By the time they are adults, they will have accumulated decades more. There is a researcher in Germany named Heather Leslie who has spent years measuring microplastic concentrations in human blood. In 2022, her team published the first confirmation that microplastics circulate in the bloodstream of living humans. When she described the findings, she said something that has stayed with scientists since. She said she had not expected to find them at all. She had designed the study expecting the blood-brain barrier to be the end of the story. The blood might be contaminated, but the brain would be protected. That assumption is gone now, and what replaced it is not a clear picture. It's a set of correlations: elevated plastic in dementia patients, elevated plastic in inflamed tissue, elevated plastic in reproductive organs with declining fertility rates that keep pointing in the same direction without yet being able to say definitively what they mean. We are, in the words of one toxicologist, running the largest uncontrolled experiment in human history, on ourselves, without a control group. Here is what makes this unlike almost any environmental crisis that came before. Lead was removed from gasoline. CFCs were banned. DDT was prohibited. In each case, once the source was identified and eliminated, the problem began to reverse. The environment recovered. Human exposure dropped. Plastic does not work that way. The particles already in the environment, in the ocean, in the soil, in the air, will continue to fragment into smaller pieces for decades. The plastic already in your body cannot be removed. No medical procedure, no dietary intervention, no drug exists that can extract microplastics from brain tissue. What is there, is there. The question researchers are now asking is not how to undo this, it is how bad it will get, and how much of what we are calling an epidemic of neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's rates rising, dementia diagnoses climbing year on year, has a physical cause sitting inside the brain tissue of every person in the developed world. We don't know. That's the honest answer. The science is moving fast, faster than it ever has on this question. But it is running behind an exposure that has already been happening for 50 years. What we do know is this. The brain samples from 2024 have more plastic than the samples from 2016. The samples from 2030 will almost certainly have more than the samples from 2024. And the children being born today, who already carry particles inherited before their first breath, will carry more than any generation before them. This is not a future problem. It is a present one. It is inside you. It arrived without announcement and without permission, and it is not leaving. The only question still open is what it is doing while it stays. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.